You have been lied to about the nature of the world since the moment you drew your first breath. Society tells you that virtue is its own reward, that the meek shall inherit the earth, and that goodness is a shield against the darkness. But Niccolò Machiavelli, the architect of modern realism, whispers a different truth from the shadows of history. He posits that the gap between how we live and how we ought to live is so vast that he who neglects what is done for what ought to be done sooner affects his ruin than his preservation. This is the hook of the void. You are walking unarmed into a battlefield where your enemies are wielding the weapon of reality. To understand Machiavelli is not to embrace evil, it is to embrace the cold, surgical precision of necessity. A man who wishes to make a profession of goodness in everything must necessarily come to grief among so many who are not good. This is the first lesson of sovereignty. You must learn to be able not to be good, and to use this ability or not use it according to necessity. We are dissecting the naive belief that the universe cares about your intentions. The universe only respects the architecture of your will and the outcome of your actions. If you cannot suspend your morality when survival demands it, you are not a leader, you are a victim in waiting. Prepare yourself, for in the next chapter, we will dismantle the fragile illusion of love. Cruelty, when used by a master, is not a vice, it is a surgical instrument. Most men fail because they are paralyzed by the fear of being seen as harsh. But Machiavelli teaches us the paradox of compassion. Too much mercy allows disorder to thrive, and disorder kills more than the executioner ever could. Cesare Borgia was considered cruel, yet his cruelty reconciled the Romagna, unified it, and restored it to peace and loyalty. Here lies the distinction between well-committed and ill-committed cruelty. Cruelty well committed is done once, out of absolute necessity, and then converted into the greatest possible benefit for the subjects. Ill-committed cruelty increases over time rather than diminishing. It is the sign of a weak mind flailing for control. If you must inflict pain, do it all at once. Men mourn a small injury, but fear a devastating one. Therefore, the injury you do to a man should be such that you do not fear his revenge. This is predatory logic applied to social dynamics. Benefits, however, should be granted little by little, so that they may be better tasted. Control the dopamine of those around you, become the architect of their relief. But how does one maintain this control without being hated? The answer lies in the mask. There are two ways of contesting, the one by the law, the other by force. The first method is proper to men, the second to beasts, but because the first is frequently insufficient, one must have recourse to the second. You must be the centaur, half man, half beast, capable of navigating the high courts of reason and the dark alleys of violence. The lion cannot protect himself from traps, and the fox cannot defend himself from wolves. One must therefore be a fox to recognize traps, and a lion to frighten wolves. Those that wish to be only lions do not understand this. They rely on brute force, and are eventually outmaneuvered by the cunning. To be the fox is to understand the art of simulation and dissimulation. You must appear merciful, faithful, humane, religious, and upright. But your mind must be so disposed that when it is needful to be otherwise, you may be able to change to the opposite qualities. Men judge generally more by the eye than by the hand, for everyone can see and few can feel. Everyone sees what you appear to be, few really know what you are. This is the architecture of perception. But what happens when the facade cracks? What binds them to you when the illusion fades? Is it better to be loved than feared, or feared than loved? The ideal is to be both, but since the two rarely come together, it is much safer to be feared than loved. Love is held by a chain of obligation, which, men being selfish, is broken whenever it serves their purpose. But fear is maintained by a dread of punishment, which never fails. We are speaking of the volatility of human emotion. Men are ungrateful, fickle, false, cowardly, and covetous. As long as you succeed, they are yours entirely. They will offer you their blood, property, life, and children. But when the need approaches, they revolt. Friendships that are obtained by payments, and not by greatness or nobility of mind, may indeed be earned, but they are not secured. However, there is a critical distinction. You must make yourself feared in such a way that if you do not gain love, you at any rate avoid hatred. Fear and the absence of hatred may go together. This is achieved by abstaining from the property of your citizens and from their women. Men forget the death of their father sooner than the loss of their patrimony. But even the most feared prince is subject to the chaos of the world. Machiavelli introduces the concept of Fortuna, the unpredictable river that ruins everything in its path. Many believe that the affairs of the world are governed by fortune and God, so that men cannot direct them. But to admit this is to extinguish our free will. I judge that it may be true that fortune is the arbiter of one half of our actions, but that she still leaves us to direct the other half. Fortune is like one of our destructive rivers, which, when it is angry, turns the plains into lakes. But this does not mean that men, when the weather becomes fair, shall not make provision, both with defences and barriers. The man of vert, of power and skill, builds his dikes before the rain falls. He who relies least on fortune is lost the least. You must be impetuous rather than cautious, for fortune is a woman, and if you wish to keep her under, it is necessary to beat and ill-use her. This is the language of conquest. Adaptability is the highest form of intelligence. As the winds of fortune change, so too must the sails of your methodology. If you are cautious when the times demand aggression, you will be ruined. But even the adaptable prince needs counsel, and here lies the trap of the ego. There is no greater test of a man's intelligence than the men he chooses to surround himself with. The courts of power are infested with flatterers, a plague from which it is difficult to preserve oneself. Men are so self-complacent in their own affairs that they are easily deceived. The only way to guard against flattery is to let it be known that men do not offend you by telling you the truth. However, if everyone can tell you the truth, you lose respect. The solution is the third way. Choose wise men for your counsel, and give them alone full liberty to speak the truth to you. But only of those things you ask, and of nothing else. A prince who is not wise himself cannot be well advised. Good counsels, from whomsoever they may come, must be born of the prudence of the prince, and not the prudence of the prince from good counsels. You must be the origin of your own strategy. The advisers are merely the polish on the blade. Avoid the sycophant who echoes your ego. Seek the shadow who challenges your assumptions. Now, we synthesize these laws into the modern avatar of power. We arrive at the final synthesis, the modern prince. Machiavelli wrote for a Medici, but his words are the blueprint for the CEO, the entrepreneur, and the sovereign individual. To apply this is to accept that the world is a place of conflict, not comfort. You must cultivate the dual nature, the intellect of the philosopher and the brutality of the gladiator. Do not seek to be loved by the masses, seek to be indispensable to the structure. Do not fear the accusation of being calculating. Fear the reality of being outmaneuvered. The art of power is not about oppression. It is about the effective management of reality. It is about seeing the strings that move the puppets and having the courage to take hold of them. Ascension requires you to leave your innocence at the door of the palace. Pick up the mask. Sharpen the claw. Build your dikes against the flood. This is mind-plicit. The architecture of your mind is now complete.